On Facebook, welcome to tonight's program. You have our new August program, guys. We have a lot of neat events coming up in August. We still have a few more things this month. We have a concert tomorrow night at 7 and a concert Saturday night at 6. The Laughing Jack Band is here Saturday. I remember their name this time. Liz Bohall from Columbus is in that band. And then tomorrow night's concert is Matthew Rust and Warren Mountaineer. And in August, if you go through the program guide, we're going to do a Zoom event with Sharon Randall, who is an author. She has syndicated columnists. She used to run, her column used to run in the Republic. But anyway, she was here, and I've got it in the program guide, like 7 years ago or something. We had a huge crowd in the Red Room. It was overflowing. We had to turn people away. So that's going to be fun. We also have somebody who's going to act like she was Jackie Kennedy. At the end of August. I know, pretty cool. So tonight we're here for the program before Bartholomew County. Our presenter is Sam Kimsey, who, and I wrote it down, a registered professional archaeologist. Did I get it right?
Yes.
Sam works part-time with library and full-time. You're probably going to talk a little bit about your job now.
Yeah, the CRM work.
So thanks everybody for coming and thank you, Sam.
Thank you, Mary Claire. All right, so I'll just go ahead and get started. I'm Sam Kimsey. My pronouns are she, her. I have a BA from the University of Evansville in classical archaeology and an MA from the University of Leicester in the UK in classical archaeology. So if you can tell by classical archaeology, my main focus has always been Rome and Greece. So there's really not a whole lot of that around here though. So for the past 6 months, really, only the past 6 months, I've really been focusing on Native American archaeology. So I'm still kind of green to this area, and specifically the Midwest. So basically what I'm going to talk about is everything that we know so far, and it's going to be really brief. I don't think it'll take more than half an hour, just because when you drone on about facts and all this, it can, zone out. I don't know. So it starts really about 12,000 years ago. I'm going to go over some terms real fast. Point, we call them projectile points, mainly because, and a lot of times people consider them arrowheads, but not all points are arrowheads, but all arrowheads are in fact points. So there's very different terms for different projectile points. And these are some, just like the different terminologies around projectile points, and how we can determine what type they are and what time period they would be from, or what region they're from, specifically different chert types. And chert, flint, is pretty prominent around here, as you probably can tell from just walking in the cornfields and finding all these points. And these are just the different types. So if, say, this type is found in Ohio, we know that they either are traveling game or, depending on the time, or perhaps they're even trading different chert types to people who don't have such prominent amounts of chert. And we also have lots of limestone and shale deposits, which is the Native Americans wouldn't have used, well, they did use the limestone and shale for other tools, but, and shale is what they frack for. So if you ever wonder what shale is, and you probably see it all the time, but a lot of people will confuse it for a lithic material just because of the way it's shaped. It can be very pointy, and it's often confused for chert, but it's not shiny like chert, so. So I'm just going to go ahead and get into it. Paleo Indians arrived here around 12 to 10,000 BC. And so they were very nomadic. They would have been hunter and gatherers. Following big game, they would have had very temporary settlements. And then it was like towards the end of the last glacial period. Now around here would have been a lot more animals. There were still some glaciers in northern Indiana, but not down in the south. So, but you do see that runoff from the glaciers when they were melting in the warming period. And then these are some of the most common projectiles. Clovis is probably the one you've heard the most of. It's very famous, and you would have found some around here. I have never personally got to hold one, but I hear they're pretty cool. They're very big, and I would say like the size of my hand, but they are pretty cool. And it would be awesome to find a whole piece of one, but remember, they're from like 12,000 years ago. So it's, or, well, no, 14,000 years ago, 12,000 BCE. So, and then towards the end, around 8,000 BCE, they would have started doing low density settlements, about 20, 25 people. They wouldn't have had very specific job titles, basically. They all would have been pretty well rounded on doing everything. Just it's basic survival, you know. If you're only good at one thing, how are you gonna make it in that tough world? And then there's a few sites in Bartholomew County, and then some of the more famous one is the Magnet and Alted site. And here are some of the bigger projectiles. This is a Clovis, and you can tell by how big it is. I'm not sure if that one's a Clovis. Not an expert yet on these. So this, I don't know why you can't see it. This is the Magnet Alton site. I'm gonna move this over so I can read that. This was found in Perry County, and they have they use the cave systems for rock shelters and everything. And what you can see here is a food processing area, and these would have been different types of points that they use for game. And I think that one might actually be a scraper. But they would take like nuts and different things like that and process the food. This is one of the earliest sites in Indiana, just that I should have specified that. In Bartholomew County, there are, oops, I guess I can make that big again. There are 5 known lithic scatters and 3 isolated finds of these. So they were here in Bartholomew County, but that's all we really know about. They found fluted points and Clovis points. I guess I should say, when we say lithic scatters, there would be like different tools, different points, and that's all we really know. We don't really have anything else in Bartholomew County. And these were found in Azalea, Elizabethtown, and Camp Atterbury. They do a lot of work in Camp Atterbury. There's actually quite a bit of sites there. We have the McCullough site, and that's Lake Paleo Indian through the Lake Woodland. And you might have probably seen them excavating this area where they found cremations and inhumations of human remains. It's actually just south of Bartholomew County. It's like McCullough Park, I think it's called. It was right around there, and that's why they call it the McCullough site.
So McCullough site is where?
By McCullough Park.
So like the McCullough Housing Addition?
Yes, around that area. And that's actually how they stumbled upon the site.
Okay.
Was doing CRM work, which is what I do. The CRM work is basically when they go to build complexes or, go to do anything that might disturb the ground, people like me, we go in. And sometimes you find really cool sites like McCullough, or you find just dirt, and it's, is what it is. And then that's the different type of chert. It's the Upper Mercer, Laurel, and Wyandot chert. But it is, and those are based on color, texture, and quality. So during this time, they weren't expert flint knappers. What they looked for was really high quality chert, so that it would last longer. And later on in the periods, they use lower quality chert, but they're really good at it. So it doesn't matter the type of chert because they're so skilled at it, and they have more separate sets of skills. So like in this time period, everyone really needed to learn how to do everything here and there.
So the Wyandotte church is from like the cave area?
Mhm.
Wyandotte, Indiana, okay.
And, obviously, Indiana has a lot of cave systems, especially southern Indiana. So these type of people would have been using the cave systems as shelters since they were so nomadic. They wouldn't have set up the wigwams or wattle and daubs or the longhouses that you see later on in different periods. And no, I don't know. In the Midwest, there are no teepees, and I don't know if you know that, but those were more for out west. Just FYI, thought I'd specify that, but that's not later on. That's all right. So then we get to the early Archaic period. Again, I'm really focused on points and ceramics. There are, at this time, as far as burials go, there were inhumations and cremations, so they did both. And that they really do that. They do both throughout most of the history. The variation and why, we don't really know. I'm sure if we talk to some of the Native American tribes that are here locally or out west, they might be able to tell us why. But so this is during 8,000 that you're really starting to see that warming period. So obviously people are going to adapt and change with the environment. There is an increase in point varieties, new hafting techniques, and the rise of the atlatl. Does everyone know what an atlatl is? Yeah, okay. And then these are still nomadic hunter and gatherers with low density in temporary settlements. And then they are very resourceful and exploited their environment. So again, they're following the animals and working a lot with still the kind of gathering thing instead of farming. Some of these points are, I could go all over all of them, but I'm not sure if you cared that much. One of the more famous sites is Swan's Landing. And then in Bartholomew County, there are at least 32 known early archaic sites with scatters, camps, and houses. They would have been makeshift wattle and daubs. I don't know if you know what a wattle and daub is. Does everyone know, or do I need to? Okay. Since they were temporary, and they probably would have stayed during the warmer periods, and then, in the cooler periods, like winter. And then you also see more repeated burials during this time. So they know where their people are being buried, and they're coming back repeatedly over time, over 500, couple thousand years. So they have specific areas where they're burying their deceased. And then you still have the laurel and the Wyandotte chert, which is the locally sourced. It's what's in southern Indiana.
Are you allowed to share where some of those archaic sites are?
No, I'm not. I can give you the county of where they're at, which is Bartholomew. And I can give you like McCullough's site. It's so well known and so reported on. That one's not a big deal because it's information open to the public. For the rest of them, there's a big thing of gatekeeping in archaeology, especially like a lot of times we'll get collections from people who have collected it in their own backyard, and then we decide we're not going to tell anyone where we found it, and it's a little weird to me, but it's the state's law, so it's very secretive, confidential things.
So it's okay to share McCullough's Run because it's gone, right? I mean,
Yes.
McCullough's Park is where that site was, but anything that was there has been removed and is in storage at some college or.
Yeah, at a college, at the state, at a museum, there's somewhere. I don't know where, but They're somewhere.
Yeah.
Most likely, I would say it's at Indiana State or Ball State. I can't remember which university excavated it and came in and did the actual excavations, but it's at one of those universities. I want to say it's Ball State, but yeah, that one's open to the public for everyone to know. But as far as other scatters, and I'm sure like the one that was just found where they're were building something. I forget what they were building, an extension of the police station, and they found over 20 sets of human remains, at least so far. But everyone locally here will know about it, but then because it's such a big deal. But as to whether or not we can discuss the exact locations of all of them, I have no idea. That's up to the state. But most of the time, no. We're not allowed to say anything. Swan's Landing is in Harrison County, Indiana. The 12 HR 304, that's what we do, what we call how we list sites. The 12 is for Indiana. Every state has a number. HR is for the county, and then the number is for how many sites. So that's the 304th known site in Harrison County. And that's how, and then sometimes they'll go back and take it out, so it might not necessarily be true. So maybe they might have 1,200, but they went back and changed the 300. And he took an old one or something. So this is the early Archaic. They found a lot of stone tools here. And so when we find a lot of tools of a certain type, we're not sure if it's a settlement, because like, why would they have so many of this type? It's not like they don't need that many for what the site entails. So it makes us think it might have been a production center. And that's really based on their quantity. If they're tossing out bad ones, they're like, oh, here, they'll find like half-shaped stone tools where they just gave up on that tool. And they're like, okay, I'm just going to start all over and get a new one. So you'll see that a lot in production sites. And this is the highly specialized in tool production. And so if they're really high quality, you start thinking, well, they're clearly, that also indicates like a production site, just because of the specialization and the high quality of it. And then it's, and with this one, they think it was a trading post. So with a production site, it would have been, they think they're often people come to them instead of them going to other people. But that means that they would have had a settlement there, because what if you come from another area and you come for a stone tool and nothing's there, no one's there. So, but there's they have the Hearst and the charcoal, so that might indicate that there was a settlement there, or maybe it was possibly used for the production. So these are all just theories, of course. It could have just been area where they just tossed all their trash. You never know. And so that's it's been highly vandalized because it's so well known and looted for a lot of their artifacts, which is also part of the reason for gatekeeping some of the things. But it's still, oh yeah, I found this on eBay. So if you're ever looking for some, you can actually go on eBay and buy a bunch. It's probably someone who's found it in their backyard and it's like, hey, I bet you I can make like $15 off this. Yes.
Isn't that kind of risky, not knowing whether an Indian or a white man made that?
Oh, to buy it on eBay?
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Yeah, you could absolutely. I mean, you know, there's flint knapping workshops that you can be trained on doing, and you could find chert, because it's so prominent around here. Just find your own chert and make it yourself if you get really good at it. And then there's your profit. So no, you would have really no idea. Especially if they use like the techniques and found in a workshop. I mean, honestly, I've only been doing it for 6 months. I probably wouldn't be able to tell if it was 5,000 years old or 6 months old. Other than it might be really banged up. it's really hard to find things so pristine because usually, especially on these will get chipped off. This will get chipped off. Now, of course, you still can find them. Of course, I'm sure you guys have all found whole ones. You found broken ones. Just. But no, it would be pretty easy if you knew what you were doing. It'd be pretty easy to. What's the word? Not counterfeit it, but do a fake. And
Recreate it.
recreate it, yeah. It'd be pretty easy to do, actually. There are also 32 known sites that we know of. And with the known sites, I'm not talking about just like little isolated finds or lithic scatters. These are where we know they have large amounts of these projectile points or ceramics. There's one that in Columbus that was occupied from the early Archaic to the early Woodland. And you still find the same type of chert, but you see the arrival of the Jeffersonville chert. Not super good at chert yet, but many people can tell the difference of the different types of chert that they've been using. So, and again, it's like texture, quality, all these other things. With the arrival of Jeffersonville, it just means that they're doing lower quality of chert and they're getting better at what they're doing. So, I have the sites in Bartholomew County. They're not well known, but so didn't have anything really that interesting except large amounts of lithics. And then we get to the Middle Archaic, and again, little is known in Indiana. We know they were here because we found quite a bit of their materials. We just don't have a lot of evidence of what they were doing besides just living. We do have a few though. As the points go, these are just the different styles, the Stanley stem, just different things like that. And then there's really no clear transition into the late Archaic. You can really see the late Archaic, but you can't really, the early Archaic, but the middle to the late is kind of harder to tell. In the county, or one of the most famous ones is Bluegrass. In the county, there are about 7 scatters and only 1 campus known, which isn't really unheard of for the Middle Archaic, especially in Indiana. The Bluegrass State is in, I don't know why this thing. So the Bluegrass Site is in Warwick County. And again, you see those numbers, 12 for Indiana, W for the county, and the site number, 162. These excavations took place in the early 80s. There were 80 human remains and 12 dog burials. We started seeing dog burials in the early Archaic, but now you're seeing more. What we know about the animals is that they would have been work animals, load-bearing, and the fact that people are buried with their dogs suggests, especially if they're taking time to bury them, just suggests that they had a closer relationship, than what you would assume for a work animal. Because, the way, cows are work animals, but we still eat them. You know what I mean? Like they weren't eating their dogs. So they clearly had to have some type of relationship together. There were 132 trash pits in Hearst. So that means that they were definitely settled there. Archaeologists really love trash pits. You can learn a lot about a person through their trash, what they ate, how they spent their time, just different things like that. This site was really only occupied for about 300 years, and it shows the mortuary site and the camp. So they weren't traveling to and from this mortuary site like you'll see later on some of the other sites like McCullough's Run or the McCullough site, where they didn't really have a settlement. They just came back and forth over thousands of years. they weren't settled there permanently. You really start to see a rise of scrapers and stone tools, and then the drills and hammerstones and axes, which would have been very useful tools for beginning to start farming, building more permanent houses, and you also start to see ornamental and ceremonial items such as bone pins and modified turtle shells. Now, whether they were mortuary or ornamental, the report did not go into that. So it could be either or. Because even if they're buried with it, they could have been just what they wore in their lifetime, not specifically buried for a religious belief or anything. So, I don't know why. Let's keep doing that. Okay. And then we get to the late Archaic. This was around 4,000 to 3,500 to 1,500 BCE. And again, we're just gradually increasing in tool varieties, point varieties, ceramic varieties, and they're just gaining speed now. Whether or not they're specific to certain areas or certain people, they're not 100% sure, or if they were trading with other temporary settlements and nomadic lifestyles, we're not 100% sure. Monos and mortars and grinding slabs, those are basically where you're taking corn or soybeans and you're basically mashing it down for food. I wish I should have put a picture in here, but it's basically like a flat thing, and it's like it's like a well-rounded rock that they've specifically made for that point, and just grinding the nuts, any type of plant that they could use. Again, by this time, you're starting to see this real big rise of ornamental pins, beads, shells, pearls, because they did have mussels. Not sure about oysters or where they're getting these pearls, but they did specify pearls. Whether or not they were found in the Great Lakes and people are coming down, or but we do know from their shells that they did have a wide variety of shellfish that they were consuming, a lot more than you would see today. So, and then again, you're starting to get these different types of points, and I don't know if you could see that gradually how they're getting smaller and more precise in their making as they go through. Because when we began during this time, you could really see the difference. See how plain they are, but they're, and as we gradually go further, they're becoming more intricate, different types. And again, their chert quality is definitely going down. They're becoming more specialized. They're getting better at making these different types of projectile points. Two of the more famous sites are McKinley and Mccain. And it's a little frustrating because those are pretty well gatekept as well. I had quite a bit of trouble trying to find the reports on these. I could find the reports, but they were quite a bit of it I couldn't read. So you might have to have a PhD. Quite a bit of archaeologists have PhDs. I do not want to go back to school. I've been in school too long. And then in the county, there's at least 77 known sites, camps, scatters, villages, and they're smaller villages. It's not like Angel Mounds or Cahokia yet. That's not until 1000 CE. So McCain site is in DuBois County. It's very well known for its shell midden, and that's it doesn't go into different types of shells. I don't know if they even wrote it down. It just says shell in their report. So it would have been nice had they been more specific about the different types of shells, but I don't think they were that concerned about shells when they excavated this. So they have bone and antler artifacts. So they're starting to become more decorative, and these would have been for utilitarian, so like usefulness, ornamental, or ceremonial. It's kind of hard to tell, again, between ornamental and ceremonial, unless there's specific tools used for ceremonial purposes. But, and then this site just has a huge amount of different, like needles, pins, fish hooks that they're using bones from, and just all different types of, and this is really around the time that you start to see quite a bit of fish hooks. So they're starting to, I think what they think is that they were more into spearfishing before this time period, and now they've started doing hooks. I feel like they probably would have had nets as well, but those would have been organic material and would not have survived. But it just makes sense that they would have had it, but there's no evidence. That's just a theory. So this one I do show somewhat of where it's at. It's right here. And that's the McCain site. This is actually open to the public, so I didn't feel. But these are also a lot of late Archaic sites along the Ohio River. There's actually the White Forks right here and right here that goes into the Ohio. McKinley site. I could not find very much information. It also could have been because it was excavated in the 50s and they did not keep good information. And most likely all the items that they found here, besides that picture, the only picture I could find, is it's probably lost in a warehouse somewhere in a box. So I don't know if anyone has a whole lot of access to it, except the one report they wrote 70 years ago. So, but if you ever get curious, there's quite a few sites that were excavated 70, 100 years ago. And that's always fun trying to look up and track down. So then we go to the late terminal Archaic. It's kind of like the reason they separate the late and the terminal is because it's so much more transitional. It's not like clear cut, like they did this time, they did this that time. So they just kind of made this separate because you start to see a mix of these early woodland, different periods. The turkey tail points really become really prominent during this time. That's right there. Because most likely it would have been attached to something. And they would have wanted to put it in there, and but that's the organic material and just does not survive. Of course, it's still just a theory, but obviously it would have been attached. What it was attached to, don't know. But you're gaining smaller points and micro tools, and you start to see an increase of pit features. So like where they're like cooking or burning, and it would have been more permanent because if you have temporary fires, you're not going to see evidence of it 5,000 years later. If you have really permanent ones that's being used over decades, you're going to see those pit features. And then larger amounts, just again, the variety is increasing. You start to see the longhouses because, and we know this from post holes. Before they were probably the wattle and daub and the wigwams. So, and wigwams still have post holes, but they're not as prominent, and you can tell where the post holes are here and where they're set. So we know with these longhouses that they are becoming really permanent settlements, and with the pits and different things like that. The Wint site, and we actually have someone who was actually at the Wint site. So this is near Azalea. You have pits, you have the post molds. Post molds are, because it's organic, the wood, you don't have the post there anymore. What you do is you basically have an indentation that you can see. And then there are 2 to 3 rudimentary homes and hundreds of discarded tools. So these are actually all found from the Wint site. And I'm sure you found quite a bit as well while you were there.
We were mostly focused on the house patterns.
Oh, okay, yeah, that's cool.
Finding the mold, the profiling them, and one of my students got to work in a fire pit.
Oh, okay, cool.
Not me.
Oh. Just had to look on and envy.
Guess he was better than me.
Oh, he was probably just young. They wanted him to have, experience. early woodland. I don't know why that. I honestly have no idea why it made it all large. I must have done something. 1,000 to 2,200 BCE. Again, different ceramics and flints. Basically, that's just the repeated thing. They're just becoming wider varieties. And you see the arrival of the Adena people. That's the burial mounds and log tombs and grave goods. So before we can really tell ornamental from ceremonial, because but here the way you can kind of tell more that they're ceremonial is that they're more tool-like or more elaborate, where it wouldn't have made sense to be an everyday wear type of thing, like your Sunday clothes, that kind of thing. And then the crab orchard phase is a big indicator that you found an early woodland site, and that's kind of like what this looks like. Sites are the Nolan Mound and Mound State Park. As far as in Bartholomew County, it was really hard to try and go through all these sites, but there was over 100, and I just quit counting, so there was quite a bit. So you're really starting to see more activity here in southern Indiana, and I think a large part of that is the Ohio River. You have Clifton Creek, you have the White River, and they're all just kind of flowing to another. And since they're becoming more sedimentary, they're because of they're no longer just locally sourcing chert, they're getting it from other places. So we know that they must be somehow trading or traveling large distances, but trading makes more sense because they have permanent settlements now. And then you have you have the Nolan Mound and Mound State Park. Both of these you can actually visit. So the mounds there are pretty good about not gatekeeping. This is kind of what this would have looked like at the time frame. This is the Adena and the Hopewell. I forgot to mention the Hopewell. That's the different, just the, and they, sometimes I call them the Havana Hopewell, Ohio Hopewell, crab orchard culture. And then you also have the Adena and the Hopewell like intermixing. And the Adena came first, and then the Hopewell came after the Adena. But it's so transitional, and they have very similar. You really have to be an expert to see the differences in the chert, because I can't tell. And same with some of their pottery and stuff. So Nolan Mound is in Dearborn County. Glenn A. Black, you probably heard of him. He's a very famous Indiana archaeologist. He's actually pretty famous out the U.S. and the archaeological world, and across Europe, just for all his work. Investigations began early in the 1870s. So a lot of it was grave round, because they were finding really cool artifacts. So and then everything, if you wish to visit, you can actually contact IU, and they would be more than willing to let you look at them, except the remains. They probably won't let you look at the remains, but the funerary items they might. Technically, they NAGPRA, due to NAGPRA, they should technically have to return all those items, but they have not yet done so. So they will eventually have to, but not yet. And then I need to speed up. We are 40 minutes in. I just noticed that. Okay. So the middle woodlands. This is the Hopewell. So the Adena was more of the early woodland. In the middle woodland, you get more of the Hopewell. They have they have not just the burial mounds, they now have earthworks, specifically for different, either, we don't 100% know. They had something to do with their culture and we believe, religion, especially you start seeing I think Serpent Mound is a famous one for the Hopewell, which actually I talk about some controversies that happened at Serpent Mound just in this past December. And here's some potteries and some ornamental items. And then this is, sorry about that. My bad. And then this is Mound State Park in Anderson that you can go visit. Pretty famous. There's quite a bit of human remains in the Fiddleback. You have the Great Mound, which is absolutely ginormous. I think it's like 300 feet apart, and the ditch that goes through it is actually like 16 feet deep. It's just massive. And then they have all these earthworks as well. And yeah, oh, there's the office where you can go. But it's pretty cool. I have been there just because it's right there. The man site was found Hopewell was found in Posey County, large amounts of stamped vessels. So you see a lot of this type of stamped vessels. If you saw the crab orchard, if you remember that, it's a bit different where it's more crosshatch and you can see different designs. It's kind of blurry, but you can see like hoops, different things like that. So they're clearly sharing types of things, but they're putting their own swing on. And then these had 16 earthworks and several inhumations and cremations. So the difference between an earthwork and really what we consider a burial mound is that there aren't remains in an earthwork. So, and then at Mound State Park, which I showed earlier, was Adina and the Hopewell. There are post-hole remnants here. And then the Fiddleback had lots of human remains in reburials and cremations and inhumations. What I mean by reburials is that they were buried at an earlier point in time or cremated at an earlier point in time, and then they were put in there. And you can tell because the remains are different ages, but the dirt that's surrounding them is the same age, and it doesn't make sense. Lake Woodland. Lake Woodland is really weird. You have a really reduction in inter-regional trade. Everything just goes back. So you see more and more sophistication, and now you kind of have almost like similar to the Middle Age, Dark Age. And there are several things that they think might have happened. There's a really famous thing in the 6th century at 535, 536 that you see really across the whole northern hemisphere, is that there was a year and a half, 2 years of no sun. What they think happened is several volcanoes must have gone off, and you see it in Gaelic writings, you see it in northern Africa, you see it in China, you see it even all the way down to the northern part of Peru, where crops are failing, there's widespread famine and drought. Now what happened, they can't figure it out, because if it was a volcano, you would see these layers of volcanic ash, but where was it? Was it in the middle of the ocean somewhere that we just don't know about? But since it's right around the same time, it is a theory that actually caused some of this, is that after 2 years of famine and drought, they just could not, they couldn't come back, and they might have had massive deaths, just different items like that. And then going on, the Lake Woodland. There are quite a few sites throughout. They were really hard because they were lacking in so many items. But the ceramics are cord-marked vessels. They're thinner. They're not as intricate. They are still bearing humans and dogs together, and that's at the Hearst site. And then McCullough's Run, as I talked about earlier. This went to the Lake Woodland as well. These are pits of the cremated remains. So all these dots are cremations. Unknown function, have no idea what that is. The historic, I don't see square. I might have cut it off, but and then we'll keep going. Sorry, trying to get through this. This is we go into the late prehistoric, and these are some of the sorry. I'm accident on this one because I opened the wrong one. I do not have Microsoft. I use Open Office because it's free off the internet. And Microsoft costs like $120 every. Well, that's where we're looking. Sorry, technical difficulties. Thank you for your patience. I don't know why it looks like this, but we're just going to keep going, and I'll just read it off to you. Okay. So in the Mississippian, that's way too, that's late prehistoric. Okay, in the late prehistoric, we got 1000 to 650 CE. And this is where you start seeing the Mississippian culture. This is Angel Mounds. This is Kogia, and I think everyone's heard of all these sites. Massive settlements. And you see evidence of Fort Ancient and the late Woodland influence. And then these are transitional phases of Oliver and Yankeetown ceramics. You see a lot of these platform mounds, public and ceremonial, and they're just, they're having these palisades around them. So these big fortifications. Probably from others, possibly from animals as well. But typically people start putting up walls when they're getting these hierarchical societies. You have extensive trade routes, Michigan to the Gulf. And then there's the middle, upper, the K-born, well-born. These are actually supposed to be hyphenated. And the Vincennes is by Vincennes. The middle is actually in upper northwestern Indiana. The upper is around here. And they have different settlement layouts. They have different types of ceramics, and they have different types of points. And they're having different types of ornamental and ceremonial items. Stephanie said she was going to text me with different questions. Okay. And then you have lots of, thing about southern Indiana is we do have a few, but they're mainly along the Ohio River. There's not a whole lot in Bartholomew County. We have lithic scatters, but not a whole lot of settlement evidence. And we have these nucleated and fortified farming villages, which is really Fort Ancient. And then you have the Mississippian, and you have the South Appalachian Mississippian, and you have this type of Mississippian, and the Oneida is up near Michigan. It goes into Canada. And so, just keep going, sorry, we're running out of time. And then we go into the proto-historic. This is right before contact. We start getting contact with them. And right before the Iroquois Wars. This is a very transitional period from the Mississippian culture, and they're just spreading out more into individual tribes. So this was what we know right before contact at 1650. It's very difficult to tell because of the Iroquois Wars and colonization. They were being pushed around and moved around so much, and everything was changing. There's a mix of prehistoric with historic artifacts, and they're all on top of the sites because, when you have wars and different displacements, everything's just being burned or looted, and everything's just going into massive overdrive. And then what's hard to tell is who was related to the Mississippian or the Fort Ancients. Because say the Iroquois or the colonization pushed you out of from where your permanent home was. Now you move to this settlement, but there was another settlement before that, and you push out someone else, and it's just a lot of moving around. And then after we start contacting, after the colonization starts happening, I think we learn a lot about it in school and everything. By 1840s, there were basically like less than 5,000 Native Americans in Indiana by that time, just because they were all forced out west and into Kansas, Oklahoma, and between that 150 in the 1800s, they really weren't treated very well, and died from diseases from us, died from just us taking over the land. So I think we know a lot of that. So I don't know why this slideshow is doing this, but for archaeology, I thought I'd put up a funny little thing. Some of the major laws we follow is Section 106. That's basically, and that was created in 1966. And basically what, before we start, like instead of just building on top of things, they wanted to start collecting these historic items or prehistoric items to start preserving in our past. So you see like this, because people started excavating in the early 30s, Glenn Black started pushing for trying to protect our history and everything that we know. So by the 60s, people were like, yeah, let's definitely do this. And so it was still very new though. Not everything's cataloged great. A lot of things are missing. Reports are weird. They're all different. People use different slang. And I don't know if you've seen some of these reports, but the way people write is very cursive and just looks like a straight line. So it's very hard to read some of these. But they started working on preserving the past. And then another big one was NAGPRA, the Native American Grave Protection and Repatriation Act in 1990. And basically that means all human remains, all funerary objects, sacred objects, and objects of cultural patrimony, so anything deemed really significant to their culture, they are to be returned. Now, and then FIPO and SHPO, that's the Society of Historic Preservation Offices, and then this is the Tribal Historic Preservation Office that was created in 1996 to help with the movement of NAGPRA. Now, currently, there are over 30,000 in museums and state universities that are to be repatriated, but only 6,200 remains have been returned so far since its creation 31 years ago. And there are unknown amount of missing human remains and funerary objects. So there's quite a bit that whenever they started, really, I would say the late 1800s, to 1980s. A lot of times they will go into boxes and warehouses and people lose them, or maybe you just don't know how they are. I mean, even in Indiana, we're not immune to it. There are plenty of missing human remains. In archaeology, these are the tools that I use on an everyday basis. This is a handheld GPS. We basically point wherever we find artifacts, wherever we are digging, and if we find anything significant. We sift through the dirt with these things called a screen, it's clearly just a screen. And we basically shovel dirt into there and just shake it or smash it. And then we use trowels and shovels. I didn't think you needed a picture of a shovel though. And a trowel that a bricklayer would use. And we use that to help shape the sides of a trench or something like that. It's also very helpful when trying to break up clay on very clayey, in Indiana, some places have insanely thick clay. And then this is a Munsell chart. Basically, we're looking at the soils. That's also for just tell what's going on, such as I don't know how to explain it. If it's really waterlogged or what items might be there. So I didn't go over it earlier, but the McCullough site had red ochre. That's a very, that's hematite, and it's like an iron ore that when burned, it turns red. So if you see evidence of that in the soil, you know something's going on, and you might have just stumbled upon a ceremonial site, because red ochre was very specific to the Mississippian cultures or the late Woodland cultures. And then these are artifact bags, so whenever we find anything, we basically put the date, our name, the site, the location, all that fun jazz. Now I'm going to go over some controversies, and then that'll be the end of the show, and we'll talk about some questions. All right, so after 1650, we of course know that we forced them out, and we teach this quite a lot. This is actually a children's coloring book. By the 1840s, many of the Native Americans had moved away. We all know they didn't move to their own accord. They were forced out. So we do kind of have that narrative in our society, which isn't, I mean, it's no one's fault here, but we just have this habit of sugarcoating what happened. All right. Oh, this is a good one. I wish I had. Dang, I gives away the answer. Hold on, I'll hide it.
I think the Indians moved west in the 1830s, just like black people from Africa moved to the United States.
Yes, that's exactly what happened. All right, so I can't. Okay, so I'm going to read this off to you. You can tell me if you has this. He has excited domestic insurrections amongst us, and has endeavored to bring on the inhabitants of our frontiers, the merciless Indian savages, whom known rule of warfare is an undistinguished destruction of all ages, sexes, and conditions. Can you name that document? It is the Declaration of Independence. So even at that time, we were very not kind to them. That's the Declaration of Independence. Federal recognition versus non-federally recognized tribes. There are 336 in the United States. They have reservation lands. They are sovereign powers and are protected by the U.S. government. They also receive federal funding. So the American Rescue Act that we just had, they actually received money from that. Now, if you're not federally recognized, you get nothing. Well, they probably got the stimulus checks like we all did. Otherwise, nothing. Indiana only has one federally recognized tribe, that is the Potawatomi, and they got 166 acres in South Bend in 2016. And then this is a list of all the tribes in Indiana that are trying, or these are a list of all the different Potawatomi Nation tribes out west. And then that's one of their websites. That's the one in Indiana. That's their website. And then this is a list of different types of tribes in Indiana that would like to be recognized as a federal tribe. And we clearly have like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. 12 that would like to be federally recognized. If they get federally recognized, that means that they would have plots of land. They do pay federal taxes, but it is up to the tribe and the agreement between the state if they pay state and local taxes. Once they're federally recognized, though, they are not subject, or they do pay federal taxes, but as far as state and everything, they do not get state funding unless they pay taxes. So that's just kind of where they come to an agreement of what they want to do. Another huge controversy was the Kennewick Man. This was a recreation of what he would have looked like. He was discovered in 1996. So remember, this is after NAGPRA. The radiocarbon tests proved that he was about 9,000 years old. Now again, you're in NAGPRA and they're not supposed to work on human remains, and yet they know from radiocarbon dating that how old he is, so they're clearly ignoring this. And then this is a list of all the tribes that wanted what they called the ancient one. They wanted him returned so they can reinter him into the ground. These are the famous archaeologists that worked on him, who are not well liked in the Native American community. Most archaeologists are not, because we do not have good relationships with them. We've been very mean to them and do whatever we want to their remains when they specifically ask us not to. So they're trying to rebuild those relationships by actually returning these remains. But again, archaeologists like to gatekeep and don't think that the Native Americans know what they think they know. So they try to take it away. So that's a big thing among archaeologists, unfortunately. And then, so Congress passed in 2016. So 20 years later, they finally said, hey, give the Kennewick Men back. And then, however, 6 months later, it was finally returned to them. And then the next day, they reinterred him into the ground. And so a big thing with this is, like I said before, there's over 30,000 still in U.S. custody, and there's an unknown amount of missing remains as well. So archaeologists just in general right now need to do better at working well with Native American tribes, or else we're just going to keep having bad relationships. Serpent Mound is one of the other controversies that just happened in December. The Serpent Mound is protected. It's part of their areas are protected by NAGPRA because it's patrimony. Coach Dave Daubenmere, I don't know how to pronounce his last name. He's a very famous priest, I think. No, he's not a priest, but he's a very devout Christian. And so in December, him and the Salt and Light Brigade and his salt ministries went to cleanse the mound. And some of his famous quotes are, "This land we take in the name of Jesus. Pagans try to prevent prayer." That's actually the name of his YouTube video. Pagans try to prevent prayer. And then he goes back and says, "For those in the occult, I'm not calling the Indians the occult. It's a high holiday. We went there to pray over this area. We believe the dark side holds ceremonies on these days." So we went specifically on their winter solstice holiday when they went to visit to cleanse it. And so it's very controversial because Christians believe, or his congregation believes to cleanse the area. I think something else is going on, but at the same time, it belongs to the Native Americans. And so there's big controversy about it. And he does plan to go to more mounds to do more of these ceremonies and cleansing ceremonies. And the reason all these controversies are is you treat people the way you want to be treated. You don't want someone going to your grandma's plot and performing a different religion ritual on top of your ancestors' graves. You also don't want someone digging her up and probing her to figure out what's going on, or stealing her anything that she was buried with because they want to learn about the past. And like, no, please just leave her alone. And that's what they're asking. And then these are my references, and we are done. And questions. I'm sorry, I went through the last half really fast. I thought I had plenty of time. So if you have any questions, let me know. Yes.
I'm especially interested in the Kickapoos. That list of tribes trying to get recognized, were Kickapoos in there?
I think so. Actually, let's see.
Or would you please read off the tribes that are on that?
Yes. Actually, I'm going to go do something else. Let's see. And that's one. Apparently, I have two different PowerPoints, but that's fine. Here. This is easier to read. All right. So we have the Miami Nation of Indiana. That's the one I've heard the most about, just because I know they have lots of powwows and they have different events going on continuously around Indianapolis area, in Anderson specifically. I do not see Kickapoo on here.
Upper Kickapoo being Shawnee Nation.
Episcopal. Now, I do know there's several Kickapoo, I'm going to Google that right now. There's several federally recognized Kickapoo. I want to say there's 5.
They were just amazing to start out in Wisconsin and end up in Mexico.
Yeah, and different, there are only 3 federally recognized Kickapoo tribes in the U.S. And they are in Oklahoma, Texas, and in Kansas, yeah. A lot of, again, during the late Mississippian period, they had very extensive trade routes. So it's very easily that their culture would have traveled down there, and they would have traveled down there as well.
They went down there in the 1800s.
In the early 1800s.
They were invited by Mexico to protect Mexico from the Comanches and the Apaches.
Really? Mexico was not very nice to their indigenous populations either. They decimated them as well. But no, I didn't know that. But the Kickapoos, and they got their own land down in Mexico?
Well, they didn't have ownership of land, and a church bought 125 acres near Eagle Pass, Texas, and set up a reservation. I don't, it's hard to find recent information.
Yeah.
In the 60s, I believe some were still in Mexico, but they traveled. They visited Oklahoma reservations and moved around.
Oh, okay, yeah.
And they're supposed to be the most conservative tribe in the United States.
Oh, really? Are they? I didn't know that. Yeah, but, yeah, you said you had a really big fascination with Kickapoos, so yeah, that's cool. That's interesting. That's good to know. Yeah. Yeah, usually Mexico, yeah, it's just surprising because they also decimated, well, not Mexico, the Spanish decimated their indigenous populations. Clearly colonization still goes on everywhere else. I mean, Canada, all the South American countries and Central American countries. There's a reason they all speak Spanish or Portuguese. That was not their native languages. You still have those tribes there as well. In America, I think we're doing really well trying to repatch our relationships with these indigenous populations. But almost every other country, with the exception of possibly, or continent, with the exception of Antarctica and Europe, just because it's been continuous, do not treat their indigenous populations well at all. America might get a lot of hate, but at least we're not, just completely blatant it, ignoring it. So, so yeah. I forgot to mention that earlier, but yeah, that's interesting about Mexico and the Kickapoos. Any other
when the Arch in St. Louis was started, I think maybe the first year it was in existence. I went there and there was a wigwam. It said made by the Kickapoos up northern Mexico. I thought, what?
Yeah, that's interesting.
It started out in Wisconsin and the Kickapoos River.
Is that what got you started or interested in the Kickapoos?
Yeah. They were just amazing. As long as the Comanches only outnumbered 6-1, they felt safe.
Because they were that.
Comanches are some of the most bloodthirsty.
Okay. Any other questions? Oh, yes.
Indiana is a low tax and low services state. We took a trip to Ohio and there's just mound after mound. And in Indiana, do you know how many clusters of mounds that are?
I mean, most, if there were mounds, we might have just plowed right over them for our farmland. Or during the industrial age, especially along the rivers. There's not many. I would say 10 preserved, but probably well over 150 scattered throughout.
Seems like Indiana's a backwater.
It was slightly.
Illinois had Cahokia and Ohio, just unbelievable towns. We have,
And you have a lot of in northwestern and northeastern Indiana as well. Central Indiana just seems weirdly diminished. And it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. That's where you get like different 4-H coming in and the Mississippian, those different cultures, and they're mixing in the middle of central Indiana, and both had mounds. So where are our mounds in central Indiana? And they don't know, because we should, by all theories, have more, and we should have had more contact. But they believe they would have had minimum contact here, specifically. I mean, Bartholomew County up to below central Indiana. But it was a big trading hub. We were called the Crossroads of America. That's our nickname. So we could have just demolished it in the 1800s, 1700s, and the 1900s, early 1900s, while we were trading, industrialization, railroad work. But yeah, there's just not a lot of evidence of it going on in Bartholomew County during that period. And it's weird that it's missing. So. But yeah, that's a good question. But it's missing. That's also evidence, and why is it missing, kind of thing. So, any other questions?
You mentioned the Iroquois Wars. I don't know whether people know the Iroquois, 5 nations and then 6 nations later, kept moving west and pushing the tribes west. The Sioux, a lot of the Sioux lived in Minnesota, and they got pushed out west. And then finally the Kiowas had to move south because they were getting squeezed out west by the tribes. And I don't know when the Miamis came to Indiana, but I think every other tribe that got in there wasn't in Indiana.
The only ones that they know were the Picachaw and the Way. But the Wea, is that how you pronounce it? The Wea. Those are the only 2 that they really actually know were probably from the Mississippian cultures. The others, they believe, were pushed into Indiana for several hundred years after the Iroquois Wars. So, or not after, with the Iroquois Wars and different colonization as well. So, do we have any others? Thank you for joining me. You're welcome. It is on Facebook, so if you have any other questions, you can post it to Facebook later, and then if you don't have the answer, I can get back to you and give you that answer. All right. Bye. Thank you.
Sam, do you mind sharing your email address?
Yes. Does anybody want me to email you the presentation? I can write it down and